All right, Win Magazine editor Tristan Warner here again, back for another USA Wrestling Coaches Corner feature in Win Magazine. This will be in the late June Final X issue. We are joined by Aaron LaFarge today. Real quick, Aaron, I'm going to go over what these USA Wrestling Coaches Corner features are and what they're meant for, and then we're going to get into your background in the sport and coaching and the club that you run and that kind of stuff. So, just real quick, we have a 4-page section in the front of every magazine now called the USA Wrestling Coaches Corner section. We've just recently actually converted to doing a lot of these interviews through a video format, which we can then QR code link the full interview to the article in the website. So, Aaron, you're one of the first people that gets to do it. Pretty cool stuff. But just trying to increase our footprint digitally. But anyway, these are really meant to be used as a teaching tool for any coaches out there, whether new coaches just getting into it. We've had a lot of women's coaches we've talked to who, that could be a teaching tool for people who are, maybe somewhat familiar with the sport of wrestling or coaching, but haven't ever coached women before or girls. So or something as simple as, somebody who wants to start a wrestling club. Aaron, you'd be a perfect person for somebody who might be in that stage of life to tap into because you've kind of lived that experience and you run your own club. So really just going to touch on a variety of topics, but really talking about Aaron's background in the sport, growing up in California, wrestling at the college level, and then now running his own club. So, Aaron, really good to have you on, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Tristan. But so the way I got into wrestling is I kind of been around it pretty much most of my life. My earliest memories were wrestling. I come from a family of wrestlers. My dad wrestled, I had two uncles that wrestled for a coach in California named Kent Olson, who's the second winningest coach in California. So he got them all into
Wow.
the sport. I had an uncle that started with him in sixth grade that started coaching in 1990 all the way through 2015. He took a couple breaks and couple year breaks in between, but obviously I was born in 91. He had his first state mellis in 1990 in California, which is a one class state tournament, which is real tough.
Yeah, it is.
My earliest memories were just kind of being around wrestlers and, meeting some of the guys he coached. I didn't really start getting, I played baseball growing up too. I didn't really start investing a lot of time and energy until, my uncle really started pushing me in junior high. We started going to, the club practices, started, you know, taking me to, watching some dual meets, his teams wrestle. So, I mean, that's kind of how I got into it. Obviously, as, time goes on, he put me in place with other really great coaches. So, I'm just very thankful for that. But that's pretty much how I got my start into the sport.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, we've talked to so many people who, wrestling, it seems like was almost in their blood, and it seems like that's the case for you, growing up with, relatives and parents and stuff that were in it. Aaron, talk a little bit about just, and we just mentioned this before we went on air, but California wrestling right now has reached a new peak where, it's arguably among the top states in the country. But even when you were coming up through high school, I think you said you graduated in 2009, so not
Yeah.
that long ago. But if you're going to place at the California State Tournament, you're a hammer. Talk about just how much do you feel like growing up in that area in Southern California? How did that help your trajectory? I guess if you were getting a start in the sport in another state where wrestling isn't so much of a hotbed, that trajectory might be a little slower.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great, point. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I just growing up, like guys in my own club were just, tough, and there's a lot of
Yep.
clubs competitive. I mean, there's a lot of competition out there. I just growing up and then obviously getting into high school. I mean, guys, but just in some of my state brackets alone, like guys that went on to be Division II, Division I, NAIA, D3, like all Americans, some are in the
Yep.
national finals. So it's just, yeah, it just helped me grow quickly, I guess. I just once I mean me personally, once I got in it like full go, I just started to excel just
Yeah.
quickly. So and then to add to your other question, I mean, yeah, I mean this age that's coming up there, I mean, as you can see, I think they had the most, Division I All-Americans at the NCAA tournament. So I mean, these kids are
Yep.
just, I think with just more access, to things and that they have. So it's real competitive. I think team wise as well. You see some real super teams, and that's something I tell the people maybe that don't experience it. I mean, some of these teams like Buchanan and St. John Bosco have 10 coaches on staff, as well as Poway has a RTC in their um,
Yeah.
program, and that's a program I was around. Wayne Brandstetter, when I was in junior college, I got to talk with him and just be around him for a little bit. So it's just yeah, some serious wrestling going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about, when you started getting toward the end of your high school and it's time to start deciding what you're going to do with your future. I know you had some success at a couple different colleges. Talk to me a little bit about your college career, where you started out, and then, you found yourself in the national finals a couple years later.
Yeah, so I mean, so like where I went to high school, I mean, it was actually a major football school. I mean, there's a lot of guys that, made the NFL and just played some big time football, but you know, there was an opportunity for me to go wrestle for my uncle. I decided to stay at the school I was at, and sometimes, I think about, man, I should have made that move, but when it was time to decide what I wanted to do, I mean, I had some success. I wrestled some of the top guys in the country, so I knew where I
Hmm.
was at. I knew I could compete at a pretty solid level. So I got recruited by a handful of schools. It was Coach Azevedo was at Cal Poly at the time. Cal State Fullerton had Coach Dan Hicks. I,
Yep.
I would say the person that recruited me and was just dedicated to the recruiting process to me was Coach Roy Oliver, and I owe that guy so much. He just gave me an opportunity, just gave me everything that I needed to be successful in my entry into college. Sometimes, you hear it all the time where kids just, kind of fall by the wayside or, right, they get to a room and
Hmm.
it's not what they expected. It was everything I thought and more. Coach Roy, he brought me in. I was 17, so I was real young, and he kind of got me in through like a program to get it to just have success. I took a lot of college courses, and I just actually just trained. I kind of deferred my eligibility there, and I just got to compete in opens with him in my corner, and just being around him every day just took my wrestling. It's a guy that was an Olympic alternate to Dave Schultz, and wrestled for Bobby Douglas at Arizona State,
Yep.
and was just great, great, great wrestler, and just a phenomenal coach. Like he was a better coach. He's someone I strive to be. He's just an awesome motivator, coach with some positivity and motivation and inspiration. So I pull a lot of that from him. And yeah, so after that experience, he actually left Cal Baptist. A lot of people don't know the background of it, but he left Cal Baptist and he said, hey, there's a local, it's a junior college not too far. I know all the coaches there. And I just think it's good for you, just your growth. You could just spend the time to just get better as a wrestler and still, kind of just get what you need. So I spent a year there. I was able to do well enough in some opens to get, recruited again out of there. And I ultimately decided on Montana State Northern there with Coach Steve Ridge.
Yep.
And he recruited me. It was just, we aligned on exactly what was going on. He was a national champion there, wrestled for Terry Brands actually when Terry was there for a short time. And he coached with him at
Yep.
Tennessee Chattanooga as well. So I think we aligned. He
Hmm.
said, we have big aspirations here. We've had a Dan Hodge Trophy. We've had national champions, All Americans, Midlands placers, Vegas placers, and I think that's our standard here. So, we feel you're motivated to and you have the same goals. So I was able to be an All American my first year there as a sophomore, and was next year I was ranked number one in the country. I fortunately got hurt, something outside of wrestling, and um, I wasn't able to get medically cleared. So there's a lot of things at the time. People were like, maybe this happened or that happened, but no, I was the starter and I was doing really well. But unfortunately, things happened. So my senior
Yeah.
year, decided to transfer to Oklahoma City where I was a national runner-up. So
Yeah.
feel I did all right.
Yeah. Yes, you definitely did. Um, talk a little bit about, if you would, you kind of touched on some of it. When you look back on some of your major coaching influences, and you mentioned some names there, but you had a nice, unique like variety of coaches there that you had at a couple different schools. Do certain things jump out to you now that you're a coach yourself that you're like, I really want to make sure I coach the way that guy coached, or maybe even I want to make sure I don't coach the way that guy coached. Like when you coach kids now or club, do you feel like you consciously take things from your previous coaches that you had when you were an athlete?
Absolutely. I feel like it's kind of all blended together, and that's what makes it
Yeah.
great. And I mean, I'm
Yep.
not one to, I mean, I think that's what makes my coaching style unique is, I kind of understand from a couple different perspective to being the youngest guy in the college room, right? To, finding
Yeah.
success and overcoming some hurdles, but starting with my uncle, he's going to be actually on the ballot for the California Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2028. So I mean, starting with him is just, just a really student of the sport, the person he was, and I kind of started from there, and being with you know, like Coach Roy, just the way he coached and just poured his passion into you, and was really invested and dedicated his time to you. There was never a doubt where I felt like he didn't have my best interests. I fully believed in him, and even my junior college coaches. I had one coach that, unfortunately, Cal State Fullerton doesn't have wrestling anymore, but he was a
Yeah.
three-time NCAA qualifier. So he really, got me wrestling, at a good level. So, and then also with Tyson. So Tyson was he's a really good motivator, created an environment that was really competitive. So it just kind of elevated everybody. So I mean, at the time I was there, we also had uh, two teams that brought back trophies. So it was just a really competitive room every day. So you definitely got to earn your keep. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for
I'd
sure.
say
Yeah.
there's just a good core of coaches.
Yeah, like I said, it's cool that you had a unique, almost like a sampling of different. I mean, it's not what I'm trying to say. Usually, when you go to a school, maybe you'll have one coaching change or a couple assistants come or go, but it's nice that you got to really learn from a lot of different coaches at some really good schools. Um, did you feel like kind of a non-related wrestling question, but it just popped in my head. Did you feel some culture shock coming from Southern California to Montana and then to Oklahoma, and that's ultimately where you're still at right now as of the time of this interview? I just feel like, I've been to all those places and I feel like they couldn't be any more different.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I don't, I think at the time, it's just great to have an opportunity. And I was one of those guys, you got to think, some of those guys I mentioned earlier, like Jesse Delgado, he left California um, you know, and I left California. It's kind of like what you have to do even now. Some of the kids that were all Americans for California are, Iowa State and Michigan, and they're in other places. But,
Yeah.
Montana, like, yeah, Montana was a little bit of a culture shock, but I think we all were working towards a common goal. So it wasn't,
Yeah.
and also a lot of people don't know it's a smaller school, but it's the history of wrestling at Montana State Northern is just, I mean, there's all Americans
Hmm.
the all American names are actually in the basketball gym, and there's just names all around the basketball gym. So, I mean,
Yeah.
like that, it's an environment I wanted to be in, and obviously coming to Oklahoma, I loved it. I loved being here, and the wrestling is really respected in the history, and that's what I love,
Yeah,
and the
that's true
people
for sure.
are they're the culture. It's in the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously you liked it enough that you're still there here these all these years later. Tell me a little bit about, take me back to you wrap up your career at Oklahoma City University, like you said you're in the national finals. What happens next? Are you thinking, I've got to go get a career? Are you thinking I'm going to start um, a wrestling club? Or are you thinking I'm going to go coach for some college team? Where did your mindset go from, the end of your collegiate days?
I think after it was a little bit, I was planning to be a grad assistant and I had a kind of a job lined up at, where I was going to school, but ended up, moving back to California for a time, and I pretty much started coaching there. I was helping the youth program, and we really, the original team, like I had gotten it going, so like we started with 6 to 8 kids, and I helped
Yeah.
when I could, but I mean when I came back, the club was a lot bigger. It was about 40 kids, so I helped there
Good.
for a time, and then that's when I started coaching high school. I kind of got not a it wasn't a random call, but somebody I went to school with out in Montana, and they go, "Hey man, would you be willing to come out here and just if it's even for a year or you make it a thing?" And so I went kind of I was doing MMA, so obviously I was having was doing well around when I just finished wrestling, but I went and I took it, and and it was great. It was a great experience. There's just a good core of coaches, and it was a great program. And I probably would have never left had I took the head coaching job that made me move back to California. But off
Yep.
that team, we had a kid, go. We had about five guys go to college off that team, and kid ended up being an NAIA national champion. A kid named
That's
Carson
awesome.
Disrozier, who was on our junior high team. He's was an NCAA qualifier for the Citadel. He's at just transferred to Binghamton for his senior year. So
Yep. Yep.
from Helena, Montana, I mean, so it's pretty awesome to see those kids' success, and that's why I'm in this. I want to see these kids accomplish what, more and more than I did. I want these guys to be
Yep.
enjoy the success of the sport and help them grow as a person.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize Carson was from there. Yeah, he's been in our rankings quite a bit. Tough kid.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
good luck to him his last season, following Coach LeBlanc up there to New York.
Right.
Yeah. So okay. So tell me then, how did this end up coming to fruition where you ended up creating your own club? I mean, I think a lot of the coaches we talked to, similar to you, have bounced around a little bit between age groups. Some of them kind of settle in and find their niche, like, oh, I really want to coach college, or they come into high school, or never mind, I don't want to coach for a full team. I want to start my own club, and that's kind of where you ended up. So tell me a little bit about what the thought process went into that, and how did you end up getting the ball rolling on that?
Yeah, I just think over time, I'd start like I said, starting out as a club. I was essentially the club head coach. There was a person that kind of oversaw the club, but he brought me in to be the head coach, and we started with some nights we'd have six kids, and sometimes we'd have eight.
Yeah.
But that for me that was just probably the most fun I've had as a coach because it was like those kids love the sport, they wanted to be there, and to see that club years later grow to 40 kids, it's like that's why I do this, and to help the sport just to push the sport forward. And so once after that, and I went out to Montana to be an assistant. I ended up taking a head coaching job, and then back to being an assistant, a head junior high coach, and then to where we're at now. And I think just parents just said, hey, why don't you, start your own club, and it'd be awesome to just, have do your thing, your own thing, and I think you do great. So I think it's just over time, and just here we are now. So
Yeah, just it just kind of stuck with you. Um,
yeah,
Tell me a little bit about your club. Yeah, like I think there's a lot that goes into when you have an idea. I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are thinking maybe in similar shoes that you were in at that time. Like, I've got some parents telling me this would be a good thing, but I don't even know where to begin. So, tell me
yeah.
a little bit about what's it like starting your own club. Did you have to like, find a facility, find mats, or did you already kind of, stumble into that? How did that whole thing work?
Yeah, so I mean, the beginning, it's it's kind of having access to a room, but sometimes like if you move, you kind of have to kind of not restart, but just get another nucleus of kids. So it's been great.
Yeah.
I try to keep it small at first. I just like to work with certain kids that want are just hungry for the sport, and because I take coaching very serious. It's a profession to me. It's you're essentially building somebody up, physically, mentally, technically. So I mean, I don't take coaching lightly, and even if it's just a small group, or you know that's kind of what I'm focused on, just building a good core of kids, and to see help them progress in the sport, and also if it's their entry into wrestling, to get them on the right foot, knowing that their introduction is the right introduction to the sport, and not just they're just there to be there. I want them to have the right introductory to the sport.
Yeah, for sure. What does that look like for you? I mean, I think sometimes it can be difficult for coaches, and I speak from my own experience, coaching club, but sometimes you'll have a room where you've got some really advanced older kids and you've got some, first day kids or first year kids that are, or even just differences in ages. Like if you're running a club and it's open to K through 12, and I talked about this with Kyle Crutchmer the other day. You might have some 17-year-old stud in there, and then you might have an 8-year-old kid who's literally fresh off the playground wearing blue jeans.
Yeah.
That's probably been one of the biggest challenges for me that I found as a coach. Do you feel like you've been able to do a good job of, like tailoring your practices to, you've got some elite kids in there, but you've got some like beginner type kids at the same time, or how do you kind of juggle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the part is, when I first started coaching, that it was kind of essentially that. It was kind of actually junior
Yeah.
high with some high school kids, and all the way down to like the guy that actually put the club together. Was his son was actually turned down from another club because he was too young, but he said, hey,
Okay.
man, he also plays football. I want to get his buddies into wrestling, and I just want to coach, and if you're willing to, put your time in, and yeah, man, absolutely, obviously we got some things ironed out, and his son was young, and I was like, even if it's, very simple, to, kids started coming in, obviously kids start hearing about the club, they come in for practice, or, some of the high school kids come in. So yeah, I try to cover, some technique that's just, something they know, but maybe just focus on the small details, and to maybe,
Yeah.
kind of turn it up a little bit and wrestle a little bit alive, and kind of get the new kids up to speed, and let them know like, hey, this is what a tournament's going to be like. This is, you're going to have to wrestle matches. So this is, might as well get used to it, as soon as you can.
Yeah. Throw them into it. Yeah, that's good. Get their feet wet a little bit in the actual combat, because I think you're right. I think sometimes, and I've found that to be a problem at some of my own. You're spending too much time on technique, and you got these kids in there that are losing interest quick because they're like,
Yeah,
they came here to fight basically. Some of them don't even know. They're thinking it's WWE or something, and then you're
exactly.
sitting there showing the minor details of your head inside single, and they're like looking over
Right.
there. Yeah, so
I
that's
know.
good.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, what else can we talk about? From your club standpoint, is there anything from like a technical standpoint, or anything that you feel like is almost like a specialty of your club? Like, I don't know. Do you think when people walk into your club, there's certain things that's a trademark, or that they'll know, like when I come in here, we're focusing on footwork or hand fighting, or anything like that, or do you just kind of you know read the room and base your practices off of who's going to be there and that kind of thing?
I mean, for sure, I mean, for me, just over time and stuff I've learned just, when I was younger, I mean, just kids, kids like to learn. They like to, they like to win, and I always tell the kids, it's like, we got to put those things together, you got to be willing to learn, and be, willing
Yep.
to work on some of the things, and, some of the things you may not be good at. So, I mean, we just got to put our attention to those things, and try to keep them engaged. I want to keep them engaged and understand,
Yep.
like, hey, this is a process. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take,
Yeah.
work, and you got to be at it consistently. So, I try to corner on the mental side as well. Build them up mentally, so they understand, what it takes to succeed, and beyond in the sport. So, something they could carry with them throughout their career, even beyond, youth wrestling and high school wrestling, and into college, and beyond that.
Yeah, and one thing that I hear a lot of coaches say, and obviously this is true. I just it kind of almost feels like a newer phrase that I keep hearing, but a lot of people just say their main goal is to just help kids fall in love with the sport, and that I guess ultimately that does make sense. I feel like some of my memories back as a kid, going to some pretty tough practices, like I don't know that I don't want to say that wasn't like at the forefront of the coaches' minds, but I just feel like it didn't always feel that way. It felt like it was almost like I dreaded going to practice as a kid a lot of times, because it was so hard, and I didn't really feel like there was necessarily always an emphasis on like we really want you to like this and have fun with it. It was more almost like let's weed out the kids that aren't tough.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
kind of
And,
just how I
and,
feel.
and
But
yeah,
um,
I know exactly what you're saying, Tristan. That's, and that's kind of how it was. Like, I remember, like, I don't want to say it's old school, but that's how it
yeah,
was. And for me,
that
it's,
yes, okay, yeah, you agree, yeah,
I like to, blend. kind of like, the new school and the old school. Sometimes old school is good school, and you're gonna have
Yeah.
to understand. You're gonna have to. You may get beat. You got to come back to the room and close the gap. So it's like, I
Yeah.
let the kids know that, and or if, hey, if you beat a kid, it's not a time to hang out at practice now. You're good. And it's like, no, now we got to widen the gap. So it's like, it's also the
Exactly.
mental side. I feel like people don't really focus on that. The kids, people want to be the tough guy, right? And run a tough, which absolutely, like we could be that, but it's a combination. So it's something like,
Yeah.
taking it back to my own experience. I think Coach Oliver, Roy Oliver, he did a great job of that. Like he made sure that the technique and the mental side and the physical side, the live wrestling was all there. So that's what I bring to my club. And I think what people enjoy is that, there is that itself into my club is they feel like they're learning and they're doing it in live and they're trying it in live and then they take it in a match and then they find success with it and they have success if that's winning medals and I don't really like to pin just one thing, right, whether it's they're the top kid in the state or they're place at the local tournaments. It's like it's a process of getting better, so it's not one goal we're after. We're just continuously getting better, making progress.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I like that. That's the way you got to do it. And then, like you said, it's not an instant gratification thing. It's definitely that's probably one of the hardest things to teach, especially the younger kids. It's like they're very quick. I feel like sometimes to just expect that things are gonna work right away or that they're gonna start winning right away. But it's a
Yeah.
process, and I think there's probably not very many sports like wrestling that will teach that it's like some people work at this their whole life and only get to a certain point, and but that's if that's your threshold, then it's still a success. So, wanted to ask you also about one topic we touch on a lot in these interviews with those who run clubs is just parents. A lot of times, and I've had other coaches say things like this, but it's a lot of times you're coaching and educating the parents just as much as you are the kids. Do you feel like that's kind of part of your role as a club coach? Are you feeling like you're kind of trying to educate and steer the parents in the right direction? Because ultimately, you only get a finite amount of time with the kids, in the room and at the tournaments and stuff like that. But they're such a big influence on their kids. You kind of want the right messaging going into those kids' ears, on the car ride home and at home and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then just to add what to your question is, yeah, I mean, and then you get parents that have different backgrounds, right? They maybe never
Yeah,
wrestled and maybe wrestled just in high
exactly.
school or they wrestled,
Yep.
so yeah, I mean, I think they see the way I coach them and they just kind of let me do my thing. I mean, and I just like to build a relationship with the parents and have them, understand, that my it like so because it could be two different ways. Like they may have wrestled and they want instant success for their kids. They may like playing a different sport, and the wrestling is kind of what their parents did, right? But it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you got to get them to and sometimes it's to hear it from a different perspective. It's like, I try to let them know, like, hey, you got to let them build a passion for it, right? Like whether, it came to you instantly, luckily I was a guy like that, but I understand, there's kids, just over my experience coaching, my time coaching, there's kids that, you got to motivate them in different ways, push different buttons, get them to build that passion, that fire, and they start coming around. So, but I
Yeah.
like I said, I just try to build up experiences. I just had a parent um, text me about 2 or 3 days ago, and he just said, "Hey, how you doing, Coach? I just want to let you know, my son just got accepted to, he wrestled at a Division 3 school. I mean, he's a kid that didn't start wrestling until a little bit later, and he just said, I just want to let you know, he just got accepted into medical school in a college in New Mexico. I just want to say thank you. I mean, you like everything, his work ethic and a lot of the stuff is from, just wrestling. And I know you coach like you were basically his first coach, and I just want to share that with you. And so I just kept it short and
That's
sweet, and I
amazing.
just, tell him to keep working hard, and that's awesome. So that's as far as the parents go, that's my goal for the parents is just to um, I guess not appreciate, but just enjoy the process of their kids, and it's not just, pushing them the way, or, maybe they're just too laid back and it's like, they're not at certain practices, but it's just kind of, once again, is having balance and just letting them know like, hey, like they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Yep. That can be, like I was saying, I think that's sometimes the hardest thing. And I feel like that can be hard for the parents too, is that if they're not getting the immediate results, that instant gratification, it's like, oh, well, we need to go find a new club or whatever. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case with you, but I'm just saying I think a lot of times, and I've seen it in the youth wrestling, youth, junior high, whatever, high school wrestling community, even here in Pennsylvania, it's like, immediately start looking around, hopping ship. Where can we go instead? The results aren't coming. It's like you got to stay the course. This is not a sprint. This is
Exactly.
a marathon. The sport of wrestling is not something that you master that quickly. So yeah, really, really good stuff. Everything that you said, and that story you talked about with that kid who got into medical school. Like is that not like the prime reason why you do it, right? I think you talked about that in the beginning, but like it's great to coach a kid that goes in places at states or whatever, but to hear something like that, I mean, that's like the ultimate goal of why you coach. I mean, I feel like that's really it.
Yeah, for like, that it's just awesome to hear that kind of stuff. So, I'm always in their corner. I'm here to see it all the way through, and I want them to be successful parents and, fathers someday. And, sometimes
Yeah.
they have to understand. Some days, like their parents bring them to the club, but there's gonna be a time where they're gonna have to, they're gonna be a parent, they're gonna have a family, and they're gonna have to be able to make those decisions on their own. And, why not start now in wrestling, and, being able to show up to practice and, make the right, in the heat of a moment in a wrestling match. So it's also about the growth of the person too, not in the wrestler. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the last question I want to ask you, Aaron, and this is kind of what I usually end these interviews with. I know it can be a hard question because there's probably a lot of things that come to mind, but just thinking off the mat, and this question goes well with everything we're talking about right now. What are just some of the main, like core, I guess, takeaways that you want kids who train under you at your club to be able to take with them into their life outside of wrestling? Between like the discipline and the commitment and the work ethic and stuff that wrestling teaches, is there anything specific that is like something that's real near and dear to you that you really nail into them, that you're like, this is what I want to make sure any kid who leaves my club is like has in their toolbox, I guess you could say.
yeah, I mean, just being around wrestling as long as I have, and the coaches I've been around, and obviously like my family's been around even back to 1980, and Coach Ken Olsen,
Yep.
in California, so obviously I want them to achieve everything they can in the sport, but also on the flip side, let's say a kid goes on to be, wrestle under the 20s. I mean, even, as you see some people get, you know, very good at wrestling to compete into the 30s. And that, I
Yep.
would say you know, that's something to be grateful for. But, after the sport of wrestling, you become a person. So I want them to not forget about that. Obviously we're striving to be the best we could be, the best, club we could be, and we want to compete with anybody and everybody. We're not we're attacking every challenge head on, but at the same time, we're developing for after the sport as well. So, and in late 20s, 30s, that's actually being generous. Most of people's kids' career, it could end at 17, 18, it could end at 22, 23, and
Yeah.
then what? So I want them to be prepared for that moment. And goes back to you know the kid's dad that texted me. He could be a future doctor. I want to create future leaders, whether that's
Yeah.
them establishing their own club one day, or starting their own business, or staying in wrestling and coaching and being a successful coach, or whatever it is. They know what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you said that last part there. As much as everybody wants to see the kids be successful, and that's got to be the overarching goal. But that's kind of another one that I've heard some coaches say that I'm like, wow, yeah, I've never really thought about that. Like the importance of having those kids not only be successful but also pay it forward to the next generation of wrestlers in some way. You don't have to necessarily be a coach, or maybe you'll be a parent, but I mean, there's just so many, even just as a supporter and a fan, just somebody who supports the sport, you know what I mean? So it's just, you want people to have such a positive experience. This is how one of the coaches put it. You want someone to have such a positive experience that like they're a lifelong wrestler and they're a lifelong fan of the sport, you know? So it sounds like that's what you're doing at your club. So keep it up, man. Awesome work. Thanks for hopping on with us today. Like I said to everybody, this article will be out in the late June issue of Win, the Final X issue, and this full interview will be on YouTube. Also, QR code linked into that article. And Aaron, we'll have to catch up with you here again down the road and get an update, and we'll circle back with you again. So thanks again for coming on, man.
Sounds good, Tristan. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Take care, man.
All right. Thanks, Tristan.